cause I did it my way, nothing y'all can say. In this life or the next one, watch me, I'ma be the best. I am what I am today, cause I did it my way, nothing y'all can say.
You're listening to The Deal. I'm Danny Brown. This week's guest, Stacey Feinberg, head of Family Law at Cypress Law. She's a brilliant attorney. She's a brilliant, funny lady. Love hanging with her. She gets into some taboo topics around divorce and post-nups and settlements and life in the big city. We may not want to talk about it, but she's going to make us talk about it, and it's all good. Many other guests coming up soon. Appreciate you guys listening in. We got Josh Levine of Rebel Radio coming soon. We have Greg Shane, Luxury Home Builder, coming up soon. Don't forget to tune in and check out some other episodes. Big shout out to James Ferrier, our guest from a few months ago, who's been named to the Hall of Fame class of 2020, the NFL Hall of Fame. So check out that episode and many others. And let's get into Stacey. Bye.
In this life or the next one, watch me, I'ma be the best.
Today I have a very special, wonderful guest, Stacey Feinberg. How are you, Stacey?
I'm good.
Thanks for joining us. Stacey is the head of family law at Cypress Law Firm in Los Angeles. She's an expert in family law, among other things. Known each other a long time, and I'm really excited to get into this divorce talk. This is a very serious issue. It's a big part of the world we live in, and you're an expert on it. So I would love for you to kind of walk us through what are the most common things you see that cause divorce. Start with that.
I mean, I would say that, financial stress is a pretty big ticket item in terms of causes of divorce. I also think just expectations in general are a problem. I think anyone who's been married knows that marriage isn't a good time all the time. It can be really difficult. It can be really frustrating. And there's highs and lows. And there's periods of amazingness and periods of horribleness. And I think that oftentimes when things sort of fall into the category of, the not so great times, people get frustrated and they're looking for a way out. And I think that, it's interesting. Sometimes I will have people come meet with me to talk about whether or not they want to get a divorce. And I'll see them multiple times over a period of a year, 2 years, 3 years.
Got it.
And they're not ready to pull the trigger for whatever reason. And then I'll see them at one point later and they'll be like, I know, I'm ready. So it's different, what that litmus test is for different people.
Yeah.
When they're ready to do that, when they're ready to say, this is irretrievably
Come a little
broken.
closer, please.
Okay.
Closer to the mic.
I got it. The relationship's done and I'm going to be happier in a different situation. And I only have so much time on earth left. I would say what's interesting is that when women come to that conclusion, typically they're thinking, I would rather be alone than with this person. Men typically come to that conclusion. They sort of already have an idea of what plan B is going to look like, because they don't want to be alone.
Got it. Understood.
That's just sort of my observation.
All right. And can you kind of walk us through what is a typical scenario? I know there's probably not one typical scenario, but walk us through what would be a typical scenario of a couple or an individual that comes to you. What's the situation? And then what does it look like if they're saying, all right, I'm ready to get divorced. What do they need to do? How do they prepare for it? Give us the ABCs or the intro to divorce and what someone has to prepare for.
Well, the first thing that you have to do is you have to, file a petition with the court in California and asking for dissolution. Now, there's a mandatory 6-month cooling off period. So nothing's going to happen in terms of getting an actual stamp of divorce for 6 months. You could work out the deal faster than that, but you're not going to get your stamp for 6 months. And typically, if there are significant assets, children, complicated issues, it's going to take you much longer than 6 months anyway to hammer it all out. there's these, mandatory disclosure forms where you have to exchange all of the financial information so everyone knows like what the pot is, what you're looking at that needs to be divided, what the kid issues are. I mean, so every divorce is different. So it's like, do you own real property? Is there a business that was created during marriage? Are there minor children? How many minor children? Are there issues with drug and alcohol abuse? I mean, there's like, the list goes on and on and on. So there's no typical case. I mean, I think if there's no way to sort of streamline it unless you're coming into it and you have no real property, no children. That's sort of a pretty easy.
Well, let's
divorce.
assume it's a typical West Side family with 2 or 3 children, a house, country club. They own real estate. Maybe they own a second house. They have pretty significant assets. Assuming there's no prenup, where do they go from there? Everyone does these disclosures and says, this is what we own, and the lawyers then negotiate.
Yeah, I mean, you sit down, you've got to figure out, does someone want to stay in the house and keep the house? Can they afford to keep the house? What are the support amounts going to be? Are they going to lend enough money for the spouse that's going to remain in the home to be able to afford the mortgage and the property taxes and the upkeep of the house? You just sort of take the landscape of all the financial pieces and start trying to kind of move the puzzle pieces around. In California, anything that has been earned through the fruit of your labor or acquired during the marriage with money earned through the fruit of your labor, that's community property that is going to be divided 50-50. That's sort of the general rule.
And if it's something that you brought to the marriage before, it stays with that person? If someone had a significant asset or assets before they got married?
Yes. Anything that's separate that was yours from prior to marriage is your sole and separate property. Where it can get sort of confusing is when your premarital money or your premarital investment gets commingled into the community. For example, if you had a business that you owned before you got married and the business grew during the marriage, but part of why it grew during the marriage is because you were working in it. And so your community labor was creating value for your separate company. And so now you have the issue of figuring out, well, if this business is worth $1 million, how much of it can be contributed to the separate property value? How much can it be contributed to the community value? So then all of a sudden it sort of becomes like a hybrid asset.
Yeah. So that's where it gets complicated, trying to audit and figure out valuing a business from the day you're married to the day you're divorced. And
Yes.
Lots of
Yes.
experts need to get called in.
Lots of people to get paid
Yeah.
in the different cottage industries that support the divorce world here in Los Angeles.
So once that's all being looked at and settled, how do you look at child support and spousal support? Is it an equation? Is it if you make X, this amount percentage goes to that? How would we?
Child support is a mathematical equation. So that is a mathematical equation, and the terms that go into that are going to be the income of the parties. I don't want to say mom and dad because it could be mom and mom or dad and dad.
Yeah.
But the income of the parties are taken into account. The timeshare, meaning how much the children are with one parent versus the other, is another factor. And then also the tax implications. So if one parent has a mortgage and property taxes that they're deducting, it's going to change how much usable cash they have for purposes of calculating support.
Yeah.
But there's a mathematical equation that all these sort of numbers get put into and a number gets spit out. For spousal support, it's a little bit different. Spousal support, the first thing you have to look at is the duration of the marriage. So if the marriage is under 10 years in California, it's considered a marriage of short duration.
Okay.
All that means is that spousal support is going to be awarded for half the length of the marriage. So if you've been married for 5 years your spousal, the most amount of spousal support you're going to get in terms of duration is 2.5 years.
Okay.
Then once you cross that 10-year threshold, it doesn't mean you get spousal support for life. People have this false narrative, like, oh, that 10-year mark. Once you hit that 10-year mark, you're screwed. You're paying support for the rest of your life. That's not true. The statute says once you cross that threshold, you're no longer in a short-term marriage. So we're now in what's called a long-term marriage. And it doesn't mean you get it for life. It means that there's like a bunch of factors that a court is going to consider when making a determination as to how much spousal support is awarded and how long it's going to be awarded for. And some of those factors are going to be the income that the parties were earning during the marriage. Mm-hmm. If one party took a step back from working in order to stay home and raise children, and now needs additional time to sort of get back up to speed and get back into the work environment, the age and the health of the parties, if they're both able-bodied and can work. The marital standard of living comes into play then, which is, what were they spending during marriage? What was typical? So there's a whole multitude of factors that get taken into account, and that becomes a much more complicated issue. It is not just a math calculation.
Not that easy. No. And then I imagine also if you have dual incomes, but they're not exact, that comes into play too.
Yes, absolutely.
Because that's got to be part of it as well, I imagine.
Absolutely.
So it's very complicated. Now, just drilling down on the kids' time factor, is who decides? The two parents negotiating a settlement on who gets the kids at what time? Or do the courts have other laws that say, the mother's the caretaker or the father?
No.
What?
So
how's that work?
Basically, the way that it works is when I'm talking about like what California law does, I'm talking about what happens if you can't come to an agreement about things and a judge is the one who's telling you what you're going to do and making orders. Ultimately, if two people, either through a mediator or through their counsel, they can dictate whatever agreement they want. Both.
So you can ignore the law if you can agree.
Yeah, both in terms of the kid stuff and in terms of the money stuff.
Got it. Okay.
So let's say the child support calculation spits out, I'm going to use easy numbers, spits out $500 a month. But both parties know that because Timmy has travel soccer and Sarah has, has some special needs and needs to go to a special private school, that money is not going to be enough. And so they work out a different deal.
Yeah.
Right? They have the right to do that.
Yeah.
Same goes with the schedule. You can come up with whatever schedule, especially in LA where you have a lot of people who, like in the entertainment industry, who are traveling all the time or who are gone for periods of time because they're on location and then they come back. I've done some of the most, crazy scheduling things with people about, onset versus offset versus when you're in town versus, as long as you're willing to be open and creative, you can, there's a million different ways, to skin this cat. But if you're going to end up in the court, then a judge is going to start with the concept and the idea that a child's best interest is going to be served with equal access to both parents, frequent and continuing access with both parents. That doesn't necessarily mean 50-50 on the dot, but it means that they're going to be seeing both parents frequently and often enough where it's going to be pretty close to 50-50. You start veering away from that when there's other issues like drugs and alcohol or difficult work schedules,
right?
Where one parent is just in a much better position to pick up the kids, or if you have kids that are really, really little and are still at home, or if you have a breastfeeding child. Like there's all these
different factors.
Yes.
So along those lines, maybe no average, but out of every 10 people you deal with that go through this, what percentage of those 10 just kind of work the deal with themselves versus they can't come to an agreement themselves? It then has to go to the courts, and does that become trials and things?
I push my clients to do everything in their power to avoid going to court. Court is a nightmare. Court is expensive. And you ultimately are getting in front of a judicial officer who has his week packed with hundreds of cases. Yeah. And they don't know your kids. They don't know what your
What's
life
best
looks
for
like.
everyone,
You
yeah.
know your kids. You know what your life looks like. You know what the needs are. So it's like things have to be, you have to be at a point where the other party is so unreasonable and unwilling to work something out that you basically have no choice but to go to court.
Yeah.
You know, like for example, if the other party said, I want to have the kids 100% of the time and you get to see them one day a year. Well, okay, if that's their position and they won't budge, then you're going to end up in court because where else are you going to go?
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So it's extreme. Hopefully it's only extreme cases when one side has gone off the cliff and you.
Well, that's how I take it. I
Right.
would not say that my community of family attorneys in Los Angeles necessarily follows that
because they're getting paid
mantra.
to go to court.
Yes, that's how I feel about it. That's really how I feel about it. I really don't. I think often things are litigated that just never should have been litigated, and it really bums me out.
So what are things young couples that are together thinking of getting married, what are some things they could do to prepare themselves for marriage and the pitfalls that come? Are there basic things that all couples should be thinking about?
I mean, I think it's really important that people start talking about money and finances. It's sort of become this taboo topic in our society. It's like gauche to be talking about money and what your thoughts and feelings are about money. But it's important going into a marriage to know sort of not only what are the assets that you each have, what are the debts, is there student loan, is there credit card debt, but also what are the plans, you know, going into this. Is it going to be that one parent's going to be a primary earner and the other parent, you know, if you have kids, is going to step away and raise those kids? Are both parents going to work? Is everyone flexible so that even if originally it's going to be that one parent works and one parent stays home, but if something happens and you're not able to generate enough income, is the other parent at home willing to go back into the work field?
Yeah.
Like, you need to know this up front. You need to have really open and honest conversations about money. It's shocking to me how many clients and friends, personal friends of mine, are just walking around this city and they don't have a clue about their family finances.
Really? And these are typical West Side, high net worth, wealthy families, and they have no clue.
Absolutely.
That's scary.
Very scary.
That's very scary. And then you end up in a divorce situation, you don't even know what you're dealing with.
It's scary because even though there are certain things that you need a spouse's signature on, you know, if you're refinancing a home or, you know, any kind of legal document, you're going to need their signature. But oftentimes these signatures are obtained by, it's like 10 o'clock at night and your spouse is like, oh, honey, the lawyer gave me this to sign. Can you just sign it? You know, they're not reading it.
They're not going through
They're
it,
not paying attention. And so then it's time to get divorced and they're like, oh, we have, you know, an $8 million home in Beverly Hills. And I'm like, that's so great because you also have a $5 million primary mortgage, a $2.5 million HELOC, a credit card that has, you know, God knows how much debt, and all of this wealth that you thought you had, like, is like, psh. And then whatever's left, you're like, actually, you're only getting half of that.
Half of the nothing
and
that's
don't
left.
forget about the broker fees. And, you know, who knows if the house is even worth what you think it's worth.
Right. That's on its best day.
Right.
So there's a lot of that. So there's a lot of people coming to you thinking, well, we have enough money. We're fine. We'll get divorced and it's fine. And then when you break it down, they realize, they might have a lot of assets, but there's a ton of debt and a ton of money
or it's
owed.
like, it's like even just saying you lease your cars and people are like, well, but it's still like, I own the car. And I'm like, no, you lease your car. You can't sell it and get money for it.
Can't liquidate the lease.
Right. Let me sit down and explain to you what your lease is, because it's actually an obligation, right? Like, I get it. You're driving a really nice car, but it's not yours. Like, I don't know how else to explain this.
So how about the topic of prenup? We want prenup.
Prenup.
Yeah. So when is that appropriate? I mean, is it just someone super wealthy? Like, what do you think, in your professional opinion, is that obviously anyone could get a prenup and say, let's split $100, but what do you think's appropriate? How would you say, like, this is someone that I
would say
advise?
don't get a prenup over $100 because it's
Thank
going to
you.
cost you a lot more to have it written. You're going to lose money on that
When
deal.
would you advise somebody that, hey, a prenup is probably appropriate?
Prenups have definitely become popular in the last couple of years. I've seen a huge increase in the number of prenups that I'm doing in my work. I think it's because people are getting married a little bit later, and they're getting married, and both parties are coming into the marriage with either intellectual property or wealth that they've acquired, and they want to make sure that it's protected. In California, what you're coming into the marriage with, that's your sole and separate property no matter what. So that if you have, you inherited $1 million from grandpa and it's sitting in an account and it's, not being utilized except for to take money out for you to spend or buy, then, I would say you don't really need a prenup. That's your separate property. There's no confusion on that. But if you're taking that money out and you're starting a business and that business is being created during marriage, well, then it gets confusing. So there are reasons to get a prenup when you not only want to say what I had before is mine, but you want to say things that I'm going to be creating during the marriage, they're also going to be mine. Or if you want to limit spousal support. So that can be done in a couple different ways. One way is, you've got two people that are both brain surgeons. They both are self-supporting, and they both want to have an agreement that basically says we're not going to be able to seek spousal support from each other. Okay?
So they can say, that's it. Up front, we agree.
Up front, we're waiving it.
Yeah.
Okay. That's one scenario.
Simple, you
Another
agree to
scenario
that.
is you have someone who's had a whole career, let's say like a business person or a athlete, and they've signed some contract and they're going to be getting
A huge
$10 million a year. Now, they don't want if things don't work out, they don't want spousal support to be based on their income of $10 million a year, because this person that just came into their life wasn't there while they created their ability to earn this kind of money. So oftentimes you'll just come up with some sort of limit or flat fee amount in lieu of.
Got it. Make an agreement and say, hey, look, I've been this established actor. I'm gonna be making tons of money, rather than letting the courts figure out community property. I'm going to agree right now that if we somehow get divorced, we're going to agree I'm going to give you a $2 million payment if we're divorced within 10 years. And if it's after 10 years, maybe it's 5. What? It can be anything.
There's a million
ways to
There's
skin
a million
the cat.
ways to do that.
But you can make an upfront agreement so that if it happens, there is no question that.
And the other reason to do that is so that you can get divorced sort of quickly, quietly, and without having to bring in all these forensics and lawyers to dissect your whole life and turn what's already a pretty difficult situation into just like a complete nightmare.
Yeah. So are we okay on mics?
Yeah, let's pull that an end to. Thank you.
Pull it to the end of the table. So is there scenarios where one of the parties, where they can just get forced into bankruptcy, so to speak, where a court can say, well, you owe all this stuff, and even if you don't have the income to pay for it, and you're just forcing it, or is it a little smarter than that, and it's a little more flexible than that?
Just so I understand what you're saying, meaning you sign a prenuptial agreement that says if we get divorced, I'm going to pay you $2 million.
Well, I guess if you sign a prenup, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking if you don't have a prenup, and there's all these I guess I'm going back. There's all these equations of who owes who what.
Right.
And the courts say, this is what you owe, this is what the calculations are, and like, oh my God.
For support?
For all of it, yeah. If one of the parties is paying all this support and they can't even pay it.
But support's going to be it's going to be based on income. So if that person's not making enough money,
it's adjustable? Like we're going to decide.
Well, child support's always modifiable until the kids are 18. So if you agree at the time of divorce to a child support amount that's based on you earning, $200,000 a year, if you lose your job, then you have to go back to the court and request a modification. And if you start making even more money,
Then the other
then
thing.
your spouse can go back into court and ask for an increase upward.
And that's just for child support, or that's for spouse support too?
Child support is always modifiable. Spousal support can be modifiable. It depends how the original support order was written. So you can have a non-modifiable order if the parties agree to it, or you can have a agreement that says that spousal support is modifiable, but then at this date the court loses jurisdiction to award it.
Yeah.
So you can go back in for X number of years, but then it stops.
Wow.
There's
There's so many variables.
so many flavors.
So many flavors.
So many flavors.
Well, I know this stuff, a lot of stuff you can't talk about, but is there any sort of interesting nightmare stories that you can talk about without giving details, or what things that you can talk about that won't get you in any trouble? Or is that a negative?
Well, no, it's not. It's just not. It's like
I'm trying to
you
pull out
want to
some
pull
fun,
out some fun facts,
interesting,
some fun
entertaining. Not
stuff.
necessarily, it's not fun. I mean, I know there's nothing fun about this, but
No, you have to have a sense of, first of all, you have to have a sense of humor about this. And I think that, when I meet with people, my background, by the way, is in litigation.
that's right.
So I used to be a litigator, and Cypress, where I work now, is actually both a litigation and a corporate firm. The family law department is sort of like me and my associate, and then there's one other partner who dabbles in family law. But because my background's in litigation, I always have sort of like an interesting take on everything, as opposed to sort of these like family law firms where everyone's just doing family law all day
That's
long.
all they do, yeah.
I've done a lot of different kinds of business litigation. I've also done what's called Marvin law, which is when two people are unmarried and they break up, and then one spouse sues one boyfriend or girlfriend sues the other for promises made.
Got it.
Okay,
Marvin law.
under contracts law, which is just civil litigation. Okay. It's called Marvin law because it's based on the California Supreme Court case involving Lee Marvin, who was a famous actor who died, and his long-term girlfriend sued his estate. What?
I know Lee Marvin.
You know Lee Marvin? Of his work. Okay.
I can't believe that's a thing.
It's a major thing. I mean, you've seen it in the press, like when you
Yeah,
get...
I've seen it.
I'm trying to think, like probably one of the more, like Bill Maher has been sued under Marvin like 3 or 4 times, I think. 3 or 4
what's his name?
girlfriends.
Viacom. He was the girlfriends were all suing his estate.
Yes.
Whatchamacallit? I'm blanking out. Redstone. Sumner Redstone.
Yeah.
Girl had longtime girlfriends, and they wanted the house in Bel Air. They wanted the
Yeah,
30
yeah, yeah.
million. They wanted to.
So a lot of times you'll get now, as part of prenups, you'll have a waiver of your Marvin rights. Or if you have a cohabitation agreement where you're living with your significant other, you'll have them sign a Marvin waiver.
So if you don't sign a Marvin waiver,
Yeah.
and you have a long-term boyfriend or girlfriend,
You could get sued.
Sued.
But I mean, these are very difficult cases to win.
proof, yeah, I would
But
think so.
a lot of times
you settle
you settle because you want it to
be
go
done with it.
away. Yeah,
Yeah.
because it's a pain in the butt to deal with a lawsuit in the middle of your life.
So what got you to family law? Because you were doing litigation.
Yes,
You were in Colorado for a while.
I was, but I practiced family law in
Colorado, too?
in Aspen. Yeah.
Wow.
Which is like, people are like, oh, are things so crazy in LA? I'm like, nothing's crazier than the people in Aspen in
Wow.
terms of
Divorce
like the
in
cases.
Aspen?
Just because the money there is
so
so
big.
insane. And sometimes the more money you have, just the more irrational you can be about these things, because you can spend as much as you want on this kind of stuff. I was working at a firm in Century City after I graduated from UCLA called Christensen Miller Glazer Weil. It's the name has changed a bunch
Yeah.
of times.
But a big firm
A big firm.
in the litigation business.
Right. Yes. And when I was there, I had a mentor whose name was Nabil Abu Asal, and he actually run Cypress. But he was my mentor, and I ended up working on a case that involved family law.
Okay.
And I really liked it. And we had co-counsel from another firm that just did family law, and she offered me a job. And that's and I decided, you know what, this is an area that I'm really interested in. I'm going to go leave big firm life and look at this as an option. And I really liked it. And so when I ended up meeting my husband and we moved to Colorado, I decided to make that the focus of my practice.
Yeah. We had some fun in Colorado. Where did you take us to dinner outside of Aspen? What was that little town called?
Carbondale.
Carbondale. Love Carbondale. Incredible.
We were I go back every summer
I
with
bet.
my kids.
I need
know.
to get back there.
So beautiful.
Love it. So that's what got you into family law. So
Yes.
Are you able to say what a typical divorce would cost? Typical West Side family, 6-figure to 7-figure salary with a house and kids. Like, what would be like a standard range that people would spend just on the divorce legal side?
How crazy are the people?
Let's talk about non-crazy all the way to psychotic crazy. So let's talk about sort of.
I mean, I've had cases where I had people who spent over $100,000 fighting over a spoon collection. You know those spoons? You know those spoons?
Good. This is what we gotta get.
Those spoons you get at the airport? You know?
What?
Like when you're at the airport and you're in the magazine section looking for a magazine, and then sometimes I don't even know if they have them anymore.
spoon from
There's
like
spoons. So it's like Pittsburgh.
Waikiki.
No, yeah, Pittsburgh, Waikiki, right? Key West.
Yeah.
And then you can collect a spoon from all these airports
Everywhere you've
to
been.
show where you've been. These spoons are $3, maybe. And
Whoa.
there was a fight about this spoon collection. And it wasn't about what it was worth. Everyone knows it's worth bupkis.
Yeah.
It was just that they both wanted
it.
the spoon. And we're going back and forth and back and forth and threatening this and threatening that. And we're going to go to court. And I want the spoon. And finally, I had to say to my client, like, how much money do you want to spend on the spoons? I will go out and buy you spoons.
Replicate.
Like,
this.
let's go on eBay. There's got to be someone who's selling like a lot of
Yeah.
spoons. Every spoon, right? Every spoon from every airport.
And anywhere you go
For
in the rest of your life,
$100.
they'll have a spoon for
Right.
it.
I was just like, come on. How much time are we going to waste on the spoon?
So it's just about how psychotic people want to
because
ramp up.
it's obviously not about the spoon.
Of course. It's just about the principle of who wants it.
They get
Yeah.
mad, they're hurt, and they're unable to see the big picture. They're focused on the immediate, right? And a lot of times the spoons are a funny example. When it becomes not funny is when it involves kids and they're doing things that impact the children.
Oh, that's awful. Yeah.
In order to harm the other spouse. That's when, I mean, I've had clients say to me, I want to file a lawsuit to do X, Y, and Z. And I will say, you know, I can't do that. I don't want to do that. That doesn't feel right to me. That feels vindictive. And I'm not going to do it. And they're like, well, I want to do this. I'll pay you to do this. And I'd say, I'm sure you can pay to do this, but I'm going to assume that there are hundreds of lovely lawyers throughout West Los Angeles who would love
to take your money.
And do this, but I can't.
Ugh. Yeah.
And I run into that a lot, more often than I should.
Yeah. So you're passing because there's some awful situations.
I pass. And I've learned in the long run that sometimes the client doesn't want to hear my advice. But in the long run, I think it's, and maybe I lose out on the, work that would have been done in that case. Yeah. But in the long run, it's allowed me to get really high quality clients.
Right. Filter out the ones you don't want to
and
be
to
with.
have have an ongoing stream of referrals from people saying, you, Stacey, she like actually cares about
does
you.
it the right way. She has a soul. Yes. She's not a soulless bloodsucker.
She's not doing this for sport. Like she
hire
really
Stacey
cares.
if you want someone with soul. Can you give an answer for like what's a standard divorce expect to pay? $50,000, $100,000. If there's no problem and it's easy and
are there kids?
Yes, kids.
Okay.
There's a house.
Okay. Is there a fight about the kids, or everyone's like, we got this?
This is not a fight. Everyone's reasonable, but it is the typical West Side fan.
Okay.
And then we'll go the other extreme, just so
Okay.
we have a range.
Let's
and I'm
say
not saying
somewhere, let's say
exactly,
50. Let's say 50 to 75.
50 to 75 is
And
a simple.
if it's simple,
And what would it, in typical span, how long would it take to do that? A year, 6 months, 2 years?
are we selling a house or is someone buying the house out? Do
Well,
we
no,
have
you're
to
not.
refinance?
How about you're not selling the house? There's just
Okay.
one person staying in the house.
Okay. You should be able to get it done in 6 months.
Okay, so it doesn't take years and years.
It does not
So
have
that's
to.
the simplistic
The
form.
years and years happens when
It's-
things start getting nasty.
And so now let's go to the extreme.
Okay.
It's getting nasty. It's taking years and years. Everyone's vindictive. There's a lot of assets in play. There's the $10 million house. There's the Mexico house.
I have a case that I just finished up that I started right when I went back to work after I had Lila, who's 9. So I went back to work a couple months after I had Lila. So that was 9 years ago. I started working with this client. I went through an entire second pregnancy, had my second child. Now that second child is 7 years old. I just finished up this case.
Oh my God. You're a warrior.
I literally am like, I can't work on this anymore because the next time I finish this, my kids are going to be like in college. Like, this is insane. Like, we can't be doing this anymore. You
And
know?
it did settle. It did finalize.
It did finally settle.
And so, what is the range of in that kind of scenario? What would be a range?
I
we
mean-
talking millions, 7 figures, over 7 years? I mean, of course, people have spent more or less, but what would be a complicated?
Probably close. That person, that the fees on both sides
Yeah.
in that case definitely exceeded $1 million for sure. Without,
Each side 2 million, or like one total ish, or it could be either. So a 7 figures
Yeah,
is
that's
if it gets to be a
seven-figure divorce.
nightmare.
Oh, it can be a nightmare.
If
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
a
yeah.
nightmare and it's high net worth family, it's 7
And
figures.
it's like I don't want to work on your case.
Yeah,
I don't want to build these hours.
Right.
Like I would rather not be doing this.
Of course, but the reality is it could get that
It can
bad.
get so crazy.
And besides spoons, what would be some other crazy things where we'd go, what? People are really doing that? I mean, I'm sure some of it is super serious kids fighting
Kid
over
stuff-
awful things that
Kid
we
stuff
would
is
never want to.
tough. Yeah, kid stuff is always the toughest. I've done a lot of high conflict custody. I had one case where I went in and I was trying to get a dad sole legal and physical custody of his child because the mom, we believed, had some very serious mental health concerns and some other stuff. And that was a very long, drawn out custody case. And at the end, the judge did award him full legal and physical custody. And I burst into tears in the courtroom.
Yeah.
I was
So
sobbing like
emotional.
a baby
Yeah,
because
well,
I cared about this family so
Yeah,
much
yeah.
and I cared about this kid and I loved this dad so much. He wanted to give his child the best life he could.
Yeah.
And he wasn't able to do it when with a mom who was sick.
Right.
So it was very emotional. That was a while ago that I had that case, but that was like I try to stay kind of stoic, but then I break
A
down
certain
too.
day you're human.
Oh yeah.
You're human.
Oh yeah.
What percentage of your clients are male versus female?
I used to have more men than women. I would say it's evened out now. Yeah, because men want to hire a woman because, especially if I find that they have a stay-at-home wife. They like women lawyers because if the wife takes this position like, well, I have 2 kids and I got to be at home with them and how can you expect me to go back to work? And it's like, well, my lawyer seems to be doing okay and she's got 2 kids and, she's doing all right.
Yeah.
And oftentimes you got a female judge who also has...
When you say oftentimes, I mean ratios, there's more female judges, or you just never know?
It's constantly moving around
Yeah.
downtown.
So you
They're
never know what
switching
you're
around.
gonna
You
get.
never know what you're going to get, but you've got, probably
50-50
a 50-50 chance of getting a female
Yeah.
judge who's working and raised kids
Yes, right,
while she
right.
was a judge. So you can't
Yeah.
stand up there and talk about how you need to be home at 3:00
right.
when there's aftercare programs
Gotta
at
get
the
a
school.
job. J-O-B.
Right. It's like
Man.
so
So yeah, that's tricky. That's tricky. God, there's so many other.
But
different things.
I'm trying to think of some crazy stuff. Oh, here's a crazy story that I had. When I was working in Colorado, I had a client who was a billionaire with a B. It was inherited money. He was a very odd, unique little duck.
You don't say.
He did
Inherited $1
right.
billion. He was a little eccentric.
He was a weird dude. He was a super weird dude. And I get a call from the family office. And they're worried because he has a woman living with him. And in Colorado, unlike in California, there is common law marriage. So they were worried that if this woman moves in, now all of a sudden she's going to think she's his wife and going to sue him. And there's no agreement in place. And they want an agreement in place. And so, you know.
So they come to you.
So they come to me. And I'm thinking I'm going to meet her. And she's going to be like this 25-year-old hot, young, sexy thing, right?
She's not?
So he comes in and he brings her in. She's in her mid 60s.
Oh, wow.
Maybe. The man, by the way, is like probably in his 40s.
She's
in her mid 60s and she doesn't have front teeth.
Oh.
And had like makeup on, like she had taken like clown makeup, like a lipstick, and drawn like circle rouge.
Oh,
like
come on.
She looked crazy. And I remember I come into the conference room and I'm like, can I get you something to drink? Like, would you like coffee or tea? And she's like, do you have bourbon? And I was like, it's like 8 a.m. and I'm like, I don't have any here.
Wow.
That was crazy.
What was he like? He must be
He was
beyond
very eccentric. He was very eccentric.
You think so? He's just got no teeth, drinking bourbon at 8 a.m. with clown makeup? I mean, this guy.
Well, he wasn't. That
I know,
was the woman.
That's who's living with him.
Yes.
That's his choice of.
He loved her.
He loved her.
Yes, he loved her.
He was into toothless women. Everyone's got their thing.
They met at the Vapor Caves, which is
What is the Vapor
which is
Caves?
like these hot springs in Glenwood, which is like down valley from Aspen, where people go and like hang out and like.
Where people go to fall in love.
Where people go to fall in love, but it was bizarre. The whole thing was bizarre.
That's
what I'm saying. Like the really crazy stuff is when you're dealing with people with that kind of money. Like you can't even anticipate.
Yeah, there's just you can't write a script about this stuff.
Nope.
Oh my God. Well, anything else you want to educate us on? Any other interesting stories? Any things you want to promote about your business? I know you were on another podcast, but you were just
I went on the podcast The Divorce Sucks.
Yeah.
With Laura Wasser.
How was that?
It was fun. I went on to talk about primarily like surrogacy law.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's an interesting situation.
Which is another area that I work in.
Touch on that a little bit because we do hear about, someone wants to be a sperm donor. Is that what
right? Well, I've written an article in the Huffington Post called "The Death of the Known Sperm Donor," which was on the heels of that Jason Patrick case that was a few years ago. Do you remember that?
Kind of.
It was a public
donated.
case. No, he had a girlfriend, and they broke up, and she used sperm that had been
frozen
or whatever that he had given her permission to use, and then he came back into their lives and then sued for paternal rights. So it was a complicated case, but I had written an article about it, and so we were talking about that. But that's a whole area that's evolving, especially in LA, where I don't know if you're seeing this at your kid's school, but the parents are like older and older and older. It's not like, I'm like, I'm not young. I'm 41 years old, and I'm like one of the younger parents in.
Yeah, people are starting families
grade.
later and later.
Yeah.
The biology hasn't caught up with the sociology. Therefore, that's why we have this niche.
Right.
So you're seeing people doing a lot of.
Well, there's just a lot more people that are trying to have kids later and finding out that they can't themselves.
So
then they're egg donors and sperm donors and surrogates. And, you know, it's amazing, actually. I think it's kind of amazing
Yeah.
because how modern medicine has allowed people who, you know, maybe didn't have the capacity, ability, or means to have a family when they were, you know, fertile or able to have children, but there's all these other ways and they can do it later.
Yeah.
So it's
incredible.
actually, it's pretty neat.
Science and technology. So tell us about that type of basic law. I'm clueless about that. So if somebody donates an egg or donates their sperm,
Well, most of the time you're getting it like through a bank. And so
and it's an unknown,
it's
and you
unknown.
have no
and
rights.
there was an article in the New York Times a couple months ago about like someone who had gone on to like one of these 23andMe sites and was able to locate all of these siblings across the
Yeah.
country that had the same, I guess the same
genes or whatever.
sperm donor had been
Same
used
sperm.
all over, and was able to go around and like meet their siblings.
Oh, that's-
So it's creating some
Was that a
weird,
documentary? I feel like I saw something like that.
Was it might, I don't know. I read an article about it in the Times. I don't know
That
if
would
there
be a
was
good
show.
documentary.
I made a fictional film about it, but not like a documentary.
Oh, maybe not.
But
What if
Yeah.
it's not that? What if it's a hey, you're a great friend of ours. It's mom and mom getting married. We'd like you to donate sperm.
I have friends
because
who've done
I've heard
that.
of that too. I've
Yeah.
had friends that have done
yeah,
that.
that becomes complicated.
And vice versa, you know, or two man and
Right.
man getting married, we want to
Yeah.
donate your egg. So that's
What-
where it's got to get real
Yeah, because
complicated.
then it's like you're seeing that person.
You're in their life.
You're in their life, and then it's like, what are the boundaries?
So that's where there's many variables, and there's
There's
no
a lot of
I'm sure.
variables, and also there's a benefit, which is if there's questions or information that you need about that person's health and history, they're available to you to get that information. You get some of that information when you go to like a sperm bank or an egg donor bank, but you can't get as much as if the person was, you could pick up the phone and say
says,
like,
yeah.
did anyone in your family have psoriasis?
Yeah,
you
I have
know?
anxiety. I have
Right,
heart,
yeah.
cholesterol,
Right.
whatever.
But it's an evolving practice.
So there is no standard to say, okay, if you're going to be the donor, if
I mean, you can
it's
sign
in your
a
inner
contract.
circle,
You can make your contract for
Any
whatever
way you want.
Yeah, doesn't mean you're gonna. Those are harder to enforce, I think, just because like
gotta think that because once the baby comes, you may feel like, yeah, I'm just going to do this. This is not my baby. But once it comes, you might have a whole different feel.
Right,
When it's like, that's
right.
fine.
And that was one of the things that happened in the Jason Patrick case. But yeah, no, actually it was my I have 2 kids, and then I mean I'm not having any more. I'm done. But there was probably like a very small window where I was like, maybe I'll have a third. And my husband definitely wanted a third.
Sure. You said he's retired, semi-retired. Mr. Mom doing
He's not
Pilates.
retired. He's not retired. He's not retired.
But he's having fun working out.
He sold his business, and he is trying to pivot into getting back into more like hardcore environmental issues,
Yeah.
like from when he was at the Rocky Mountain Institute.
Yeah.
Sort of his passion. So he wants to get back into climate, and so he's in the process of doing that. But he is working out a lot, and we have a Peloton, and he's like become like a Peloton addict. He went to New York to take a live class.
Hilarious.
Okay, and
He's traveling for Peloton.
he is like
Michael, he must be ripped right now.
He has like an 8-pack.
Oh, God.
He has an 8-pack. It's insane. And then all summer long, all I did was drink and eat. And so I literally said to him the other day, I'm like, if you keep working out and losing weight, and I keep drinking and eating and gaining weight, we're gonna meet in the middle, and it's gonna be somewhere in the 160s, and it is gonna look really not cool for both of us.
Oh, that's not a sight I want to see.
No. I'm like, you gotta stop.
You got to start eating some ice cream and stop
You
doing so
gotta
much
stop.
cardio.
You gotta stop. Just
All right, we'll tell Michael to cool it with the Peloton.
Yeah.
God, I'm
don't-
jealous.
You should be friends with him on Peloton.
Oh, God, I could use some extra cardio.
Yeah.
Well,
no.
it was awesome having you here. I know we can go on and on. This is a very complex world, but thank you for spending time. I've been trying to get you on all summer, and now we got you. And
Thank you for having me.
we'll tell people where to find you if they need you. Hopefully they don't, but if they do, you are a great person and a great resource to contact.
Yeah.
But thanks for coming. It was fun. You're awesome.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, guys.
Yeah, listen. I am what I am today, cause I did it my way, nothing y'all can say. In this life or the next one, watch me, I'ma be the best. I am what I am today, cause I did it my way, nothing y'all can say. In this life or the next one, watch me, I'ma be the best.
I can't thank Stacy Feinberg enough for taking some time to break it down for us. Hopefully that was an education for all of us. You can find Stacy at Stacy1250, STACY1250 on the gram. You can always find me at Danny Brown LA or DannyBrownLA.com. We were voted Best Business Podcast LA 2019. So awesome. Thank you guys for the support. Please let friends and associates know about it and leave a comment, rate us. Every rating, every comment has a major impact on us, and I so appreciate it. We got cool guests coming up. John Orlando is coming from Action Junkies live out of Vegas, and go back and check out James Ferrier and Laura Wilson of Natural Pilates and so many more. Terry Heller, all about the NWA story. Enjoy it, and let us know if there's anything we're missing, anything you want us to improve on. We're always open for business. See ya.